Good evening, friends, neighbors, countrymen, and barrel-chested freedom fighters from all around the world. I got the Old Paratrooper here, and I am here to talk about a sickness I've got, or I wouldn't say a sickness, but a symptom. I've got Ukraine fatigue. I am just sick to death of the Ukrainian-Russian war. The media attention to it. It's a war that should have never happened. Honestly, when they started rattling the sabers and saying the Russians were going to invade the Ukraine, I was like, nah, Vladimir Putin's not that stupid. Personally, I thought he would just try to bully and use the image of the Russian military to kind of bully and get his way, which basically get more territory in the Ukraine. Did not think the Russian army was the badass combined arms force that it was painted as, and in that respect I was right. The Russian army has proven to be a paper tiger in the Ukraine. Now, not to say the Russians did not have some legitimate grievances, and I'm not saying that because I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin at all. But at the same time, at the end of the Cold War, it was kind of an unwritten rule that NATO would not move east. And in that respect, I can't really blame the Russians. I wouldn't want the Ukraine to become a NATO ally. That's another threat on their southwestern border. I mean, I kind of get why they have some issues with that. Because Russians are, historically, they're very paranoid. And they're not the best neighbors. So, I kind of see that. All right, so, and on the same time, Ukraine is known prior to this war for basically three things. Really hot chicks who wanted to marry a Western man and get the hell out of the Ukraine. They were well known for that. And they were also known for having a very organized crime that was notorious for being just mean. And the third thing was they were known for was a government that was being very corrupt. And I think we can see that when we have the Vice President of the United States blackmailing the Ukrainian government to get rid of a prosecutor who was investigating a bunch of people for corruption. So, there you go. Corruption was pretty widespread. And I'm sure it is to this day. I've got to give kudos to the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military. They did very well in the opening days of the war. Much better than what the experts thought they would do. They stopped the Russian offenses and held the line and pushed the Russians out, especially around Kyiv. Of course, the fact that the Russian army was inept certainly helped. But the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian soldiers, they were very brave, and nobody can take that away from them. So, there you go. And Zelensky, at first, I was kind of impressed with him. I mean, he didn't cut and run and get out of there. He had that opportunity, but I really started to get sick of him when he became a celebrity. I mean, when your wife is on Vogue, cover of Vogue magazine while you're fighting a war, yeah, that's a little bit narcissistic right there. But anyway, where I really started to get tired of this guy and his government was when I started doing the research into it. Apparently, they have outlawed all the other political parties besides his. We didn't even do that in our Civil War. But I don't think Zelensky is the hero or Winston Churchill of the 21st century or any of that other nonsense. So, but what really got my goat was when all these left when everybody made a big deal about him and made a big deal about the Ukraine and stopping the Russians. But when all these Democrat politicians who I listened to for 20 years talk about how American soldiers were committing war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, and yes, I'm talking about Chuck Schumer, John Kerry, Nancy Pelosi, all of them. They just, they finally found a war they loved. Now, granted, while they were fawning over the Ukraine, the year previously we had cut off all aid to our allies in Afghanistan and pretty much just left them to rot. So I don't buy into anything that is put out by a Democrat politician, and most Republicans either, but I make my own decisions. So then it became where Zelensky and his government was basically demanding money and aid from the West. Not asking, demanding. Kind of reminds you of a very entitled welfare recipient. Oh yeah, that's what the Ukrainian government is. Because strangely, you'll see reports where Ukrainian soldiers are not getting the equipment they need. They're not getting, the Ukrainian people are not getting the relief that they should be getting. So based on that and the fact that the country is notorious for corruption, I just wonder how many millions of dollars of aid is being skimmed off and lining the pockets of various people in that country. And I'm sure some of it is being kicked back to defense contractors, to American politicians, European politicians, because we have our own corruption problems as well. I think we spent, I think we're at $75 billion just from the U.S. alone since the Biden administration took power. Now, from 2001 to 2020, we only gave $100 billion to Afghanistan. And that was a country that we were fighting in. So, I'm just sick of hearing about the Ukraine. I don't think that this war is being fought to necessarily kick the Russians out of the Ukraine as much as it is to keep lining the pockets of all these people. And the people that are suffering the most are probably the Ukrainian citizens, the Ukrainian soldiers, and the Russian military. Now, again, Vladimir Putin should have never invaded the Ukraine. This thing probably should have been brought to a negotiated settlement last year. Matter of fact, there was attempts for that to be done, but strangely, nobody from on the Ukrainian side or the West side was really interested in it. I think they've got to keep this money going so they can keep getting richer. And I think there is a desperate attempt to do regime change in Russia. And I find that to be very dangerous when you consider that Russia has more nuclear weapons than any other country in the world. Again, the West, NATO, the United States of America, I think we're being led by corrupt and incompetent leaders who are basically imposing suffering on all the little people, not just in our country, but I think in the Ukraine as well, because this war needs to come to an end. But they've got to keep those spigots of money going. Again, kind of a dark commentary there, but there you go. If you like it, or disagree with me. Whether you agree or disagree, feel free to comment. In the meantime, folks, let's watch our six. Let's continue to train. And God bless America.